Utopia Revisited Post-Crash Newtown. In this presentation, I'm going to introduce a new research project that I have only just begun to formulate, so everything I say is highly provisional. I conceived the new project as a sequel to a book I wrote in 2010, just after the financial crash. It was called Utopian Adventure, The Corviale Void, and was published in 2011. I begin with a theoretical premise. What if we take the view fashions or changes of expression in architectural design are the effects of different aesthetic infections brought about by the introduction into the world, thanks to technical and social developments, of new sensory elements, visual, spatial, olfactory, tactile, acoustic, and so on. The new elements modify the sensibility and nervous systems of everyone who lives in the world, including architects. We catch the infections along with the feeling of risk and danger they bring. Some architects respond to social and technological infections by searching out patients to treat. Their response is rather like doctors or engineers. When they encounter a sick body or dysfunctional machine, they try to cure or mend it. This kind of architect tries to remove the deficiencies and malfunctions brought about by the infections, thereby restoring the integrity of the world. Architects like these tend to be blind to the fact that they too are infected. In my view, these are the utopian architects. Just as doctors and engineers can only keep their patients alive or keep their machines functioning if enough life energy or electromechanical energy is available to fuel them, so the projects of utopian architects are bound to run out of energy in the end. The architectural project might modify some part of the world, but it cannot reform the world in its entirety, and that is for the simple reason, in comparison to the enormous amount of time and energy of the world, individual human beings and collectivities only have a finite amount of time and energy at their disposal. An individual or collective might realise their project in the form of a building, a landscape, an urban aggregate, but that realisation is like a crumb and will soon be absorbed by the ever-changing totality of the world. In my book, I try to demonstrate the truth of this chain of reasoning by looking at a specific example after which the book is named, that being the 1 kilometre long housing block in the western sector of Rome known as Corviale. Construction began in the 1970s, but building carried on into the 1980s, and in the end the project was abandoned rather than completed. As I was studying Corviale, I came to understand the building is a partial realisation of a more ambitious utopian project called the Asse Attrezzato that was projected much earlier, in the 1960s, by a group of architects calling themselves the Asse Studio. As you can see from a comparison of these two images, Corviale can be understood as a realised fragment of the Asse Studio's speculative project for the development of an enormous new urban quarter for the eastern sector of Rome. The basic idea was to link the superhighways coming towards Rome from the north and the south, but the ambitions of the Asse Studio went much further. These architects wanted to save the historic city centre, to set in motion a process of renovation, and to give the city an organic and modern image. Working for free, and with the objective of demonstrating the feasibility of their ideas, the Asse Studio developed a design proposal that was much more than simply a throughway linking superhighways, but was conceived as a new city in its own right. The new city was to incorporate all sorts of different functions and activities, including commerce, culture, recreation, and residential facilities, and it was to have a fast transit connection to the historical city centre. What was radical and new about the Asse Studio's proposal at the time is the way it proposed to merge roads and buildings into a single megastructure form, thereby positing a new relationship between building and infrastructure by incorporating the infrastructure inside the body of the building. Studying the repertoire of shapes and relationships appearing in the models and drawings of the Assay Studios project, we can see the genealogy of the linear and diagonal features that now characterise the Corviale development and can be seen from a satellite view in Google Earth or from an airplane flying into the city. I'm now going to state a second theoretical premise. I understand Utopia to be a place that is not inscribed in any real topography and can be reached only by way of the imagination. However, that does not mean Utopia stands outside of reality. To understand the real dimension of Utopia, we must bear in mind: 1. Utopia is not a pure fantasy. It is a no place that has the potential to become a place. Utopia is something non-real, but is capable of being realised. And 2, although Utopia remains an idea, a project on paper, or a partially realised fragment, still it has its own here and now, because the imagining of Utopia presupposes a certain reality in which that imagining takes place. Both aspects of utopian reality depend on material, historical conditions. In my book about Corviale, I try to show the reality of that utopia by looking at the place in which the work of architectural imagining took shape and was able to endow that imagining with a very real sense of purpose. When I say place, I don't just mean the architect's studio or office. I am referring to the political, social, medial and technical conditions that had produced the new sensory elements and had infected the nervous systems of the architects, moving them to invent a utopia. To identify that place, I was guided by Manfredo Tafuri's History of Italian Architecture, but because I was actually in Rome, I was able to visit Corviale in my own here and now and see for myself how real utopian imagining had produced a new reality which had nothing utopian about it. In my book, I try to show how Corviale's becoming absorbed into the world coincided with the forgetting of its utopian base. At the time I studied it, Corviale had become run down and decrepit, and like so many utopian fragments, it was very hard to tell what it had been like at the moment it was first realised. I wondered if there had been a brief utopian moment that was over in a flash, like a nuclear bomb going off. Actually, I believe a much better metaphor for the relation of utopia and reality can be found in the theory of colour vision, by treating utopia and reality as a kind of antagonist pair, like complementary colours, which cannot be mixed but can relate to one another as shadows. I concluded my book by proposing a reconfiguration of Corviale, not to restore it to some hypothetical original condition, but to reveal the structure of utopia that underlies it, like a colour shadow. My new research project aims to go on another utopian adventure, only this time in post-crash Britain. I will be looking for shades of utopia in two new towns, Stevenage and Peterlee. Both towns belong to the historic designation of 13 new towns in England, Scotland and Wales, made by the British governments between 1946 and 1950. My intention is to build upon what I learnt about the structure of utopia through my Corviale book. However, I'm not yet certain the new project will materialise in the form of a book. As I say, I will search out utopian shadows in the two new towns and propose how these might be reconfigured to reveal an underlying utopian structure. I expect utopia will look very different as seen from a post-crash British Newtown perspective, and that in itself might be of some interest, but my ambition is to go even further this time. I have no idea where further might be and will not be speculating about it now. What I will do to draw my presentation to a conclusion is briefly mention 4 key factors that have led to my selection of Stevenage and Peterlee as materials to study. First factor, a comparison of the point of origin of each town in the period of national planning that led to the New Town Initiative and then to the implementation of that initiative in the post-World War II period. Stevenage in Hertfordshire was part of a planned programme to decentralise London. The original town plan was formulated as early as 1945 and from inside the government's Ministry of Town and Country Planning. The planning team was led by Gordon Stephenson. He had worked with Patrick Abercrombie on the plan for Greater London, and the Stevenage plan can be thought of as an appendage to the London plan. Stephenson was a graduate of Liverpool University, one of the first architecture schools in the country to include town planning on its curriculum. He had studied at the Institute of Urbanism in Paris between 1930 and 1932, while at the same time working in the atelier of Le Corbusier. It is hard to believe Stephenson was not influenced by his time with Le Corbusier. However, after his experiences in Paris, he went on to study town planning at MIT, where he would have been exposed to the garden city principles that are clearly evident in the Greater London and Stevenage plans. The Stevenage plan was realised, albeit with minor modifications, and, according to my theory of Utopia, that means I must approach the Stevenage plan with an open mind and be prepared to find it has no utopian basis. Peterlee, on the other hand, was intended to provide an urban centre for the population of rural coal mining settlements that were scattered about the northeastern sector of County Durham to the south of Sunderland. The original town plan did not come from inside the ministry. It was formulated by the Russian émigré architect Berthold Lubetkin. He was appointed as consultant by the then director of the Peterlee Development Corporation, Monica Felton. She had strong left-wing views and was sympathetic to Soviet communism, but that was not unusual amidst leading figures in 1940s Britain. Both Felton and Lubetkin were against the Garden City model and were able to argue convincingly against adopting it for the planning of Peterlee. As Felton stated in her blueprint for Peterlee, they wanted something, I quote, truly urban in character, as compact in planning and as distinguished in architecture as any of the great cities that belong to the great ages of town building. The failure to realise anything of Felton and Lubetkin's plan is a well-known chapter in the history of British modernism. It is often told with some nostalgia for a kind of modernity in architecture that never happened. It is not my intention to retell that particular version of the tale, but I do intend to base my study of Peterlee on Felton and Lubetkin's Utopia. Second factor, a consideration of the way each town has tended to vote in recent general elections. Stevenage is a bellwether constituency. It always seems to back the party of government and is currently held by the Tories. This is why the Labour Party have quite recently coined the term Stevenage woman to characterise a kind of voter they must win over if they want to win the coming general election in 2024. Peterlee is in the electoral constituency of Easington, which has for a long time been regarded as one of Labour's safest seats. In terms of the play of contemporary politics, Easington is remarkable today for being one small part of the massive red wall that did not turn blue in the 2019 elections. Third factor, by comparing the relative rail and road connectivity of the two towns. Stevenage is excellent in this respect. It is an interchange station on the East Coast Main Line, and it is on the A1, a mixture of dual carriageway and motorway connecting London to Edinburgh. Peterlee has poor connectivity. It only became connected back into the rail system in 2020, when a new station on the Durham coastline was built at Hordern in the eastern sector of the town. The old station being closed in 1964 due to the beaching cuts. So far as road transport goes, Peterlee sits on the A19, which is a major road, a mixture of single carriageway and dual carriageway running parallel to the A1 between Doncaster and Newcastle. Unlike Stevenage, where the A1 bypasses the town, the A19 drives through Peterlee and separates the factory area from the rest of the town. Fourth factor, a comparison of the price of a 3-bedroom terraced house in each of the respective towns. This slide allows you to compare the Stevenage and the Peterlee examples. As you can see, they are more or less identical, and I don't think you can tell from the image which is in Stevenage and which is in Peterlee. But as soon as I indicate the property price, you will know A, which one is more valuable, and B, which one is in Stevenage and which one is in Peterlee. This observation leads to my concluding remarks. Given the design and materiality of the two houses is more or less the same, the difference in value cannot be in the house itself, which leads me to ask two questions. 1, where is the value and how is it sustained? And 2, can the value change? And if so, what are the possibilities of influencing that process through utopian imagining?